Good evening, sleepers. Welcome back to the Sleeper Wire Show. I am your host, George, and with me as always is my co-host, Jason. Jason, after last week's show, it wasn't even last week, really. It was Saturday night. I am so glad to hear you unretired.
Yeah, I mean, I retired, but I got my body rested with CBD oil, and the fans booing really motivated me to come back, so I'm back on the show.
That's fantastic. Did they tell you that we were going to honor your contract with us if you stayed retired?
They did not. I might have to go.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm super excited about this evening's show. With us is Jared. Jared, I'm not even going to try to pronounce your last name. I butcher so many names, it's ridiculous. And I'm sure it's been butchered by almost anybody. How do you pronounce that? I should have asked pre-show.
No, it's fine. It's Smola. Pretty
Smola.
Easy. Yep.
Yeah, no, it's exactly like it sounds. I was afraid to even attempt it because I was afraid it would have been a little different. With us this evening is Jared Smola. He's a writer for DraftSharks, and he's also one of Fantasy Pro's top 10 fantasy rankers. Jared, it's great to have you on with us this evening.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Excited to talk some football. It's a great time of the year. The season's 9 days away. I got a draft tonight. I got a draft tomorrow. I got drafts this weekend, so I love it.
Yeah, hey, I'm glad your drafts are after Andrew Luck decided to retire.
Yes, that's nice.
Yeah, at least he did us that favor.
Right.
So typically, before we jump right into the show, we do a little bit of news and notes. We're going to skip that tonight. I just want to get right to the good stuff. We're going to start picking your brain here a little bit. As I mentioned earlier, you are one of the top 10 fantasy rankers for Fantasy Pros. How much time do you actually spend on your rankings?
So when we're talking, like preseason draft rankings, that process for me starts right after the NFL draft. Once rosters are semi-finalized, and I'm a big projections guy, so I do full projections, team level, all the way down to individual level projections for every team, and then sort of plug that into the back end on DraftSharks, and that sort of gives us our rankings. And then obviously from that point until the start of the season, we're adjusting those rankings as needed for all the news and injuries.
Yeah. During the preseason, we get a lot of hype news and coach speak. How do you decipher what is actual news and what is just, hype and coach speak?
Yeah, I think if you've been around long enough, you sort of know what sources to trust, and then sort of what guys, maybe don't know what they're talking about as much. So that's part of it. And also I like to hear a consistent message about a guy. So, maybe we're hearing it from 2 or 3 different beat writers that, this player is standing out in camp, or this player is getting a bunch of first team reps. So it's really that consistent hype throughout August, rather than just, one story or it coming from just one particular beat writer.
So, you mentioned the beat writers there. Do you follow more of the beat writers for your news, let me rephrase that. Do you follow more of the beat writers for your information, or do you, take it from the more national known guys?
I think the beat writers are better sources for us because they're with the teams every single day. A national guy might go to one practice and, maybe, so-and-so stands out that one day, but he had been struggling before that. So I like the beat writers. What I love is in these joint practices, when you have beat writers from other teams sort of commenting on what they're seeing from the team that their team is joint practicing against. I think that can tell us a lot. I know the Panthers and Bills had joint practices, and the Bills beat writers were saying how good Curtis Samuel looks. So that sort of backs up what we were hearing from the Carolina people.
Well, that's awesome to hear, because I'm getting as much Curtis Samuel as I can get everywhere.
Yep, he is climbing in ADP, but I still think in the 6th or 7th round, he makes sense.
So, you said you've been doing this long enough. One thing I noticed on your Twitter, and I have to mention it, what was it like having Barry Sanders on a fantasy football team?
I think that was my very first team. I started when I was 8 years old. My uncle's fantasy league had someone drop out last minute, so they needed a guy. So they said, "Oh yeah, let's get this 8-year-old, put him in the league." And I think Sanders was my first ever fantasy pick.
It didn't even take a quarterback in the first round at 8 years old. I love that.
I knew. Yep, I was ahead of the curve.
I was about to say, man, ahead of the curve right there.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of who your quarterback would be at that point.
I know I had Brett Favre a bunch of years early on when he had like Robert Brooks and those guys. I think I had Troy Aikman one year.
Nice.
Yeah.
Man, that's early.
Yep.
Yeah, that's even so. You've been playing since you were 8. Jason, how long have you been playing fantasy?
So I'm 39 now. I probably dabbled a bit in my 20s, but I only played 1 or 2 seasons, gave it up for a little bit just because of life, and really got back into it about 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, I've been doing it steady for about 10 years. What else do you do for DraftSharks? What else do you do for DraftSharks other than the rankings for them?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of have my hand in everything because it's a small company. It's only me, Matt Schaff, and Kevin English who kind of, head up everything. We're the 3 full-timers. So, I do a lot of writing. We do player profiles, season previews every season. I do the player news, and I'm even helping with, customer service. And, if you're a DraftSharks insider, you can shoot us a question at any time about, who to draft, who to start, do I make this trade or not? And we'll get back to you, with advice within 24 hours. So I spend a lot of time helping our insiders too.
That's very cool. What's your favorite part of being the draft insiders?
I like doing the projections. I'm kind of a numbers guy, so I love sitting down, in the preseason and doing those, and then even every week during the season, breaking down every game and projecting out every player. That's my favorite thing.
So when you finished inside the top 10, how surprised were you?
Very. I mean, I think there's 160 something people in that competition, and it's the best minds in fantasy football. So to even finish as high as I did was really awesome and definitely surprising.
Yeah, it's definitely something to be very proud of. Congratulations to you. Fantastic job. Outside of injuries, what is the main influencer for you to move somebody up or down your rankings?
Changes, or I guess I'd say projected changes in usage. So, more snaps, more carries, more targets, and, that's just sort of reading tea leaves from what we're hearing out of training camps, and then sort of watching preseason action closely and seeing who's playing with the first team offense. That's what I'm looking at when I'm watching preseason games, is who's out there with the starters.
So when you talk about like usage, does talent trump opportunity, or does opportunity trump talent, or just does it depend on the situation? Yeah,
that's the $1 million question in fantasy football, I think. And it definitely depends on the situation. It depends on the player. I think, opportunity is what we want in the short term. And I think the longer your time horizon goes, you can bet more on talent and bet on that talent gaining opportunity. But, when we're talking about, who we're going to play in our week 1 fantasy lineups, we should be looking at guys who we think are going to get the opportunity right away.
So, yeah, well, the perfect example, I think, for somebody who has opportunity over talent would be like somebody like Damian Williams. He's, for what's widely considered not the most talented running back. I mean, he does a lot of things really good, but he doesn't excel, in my opinion, at least at 1 or 2 specific things. But the opportunity in Kansas City is absolutely phenomenal for him.
And it doesn't have to be a good team either, right? Because nobody thinks Josh Jacobs is a world beater running back. They think he might have talent, but he's going to have a bunch of volume.
Yeah, volume rules all in fantasy football. Carries, targets. That's what we should be looking for.
You recently published an article about risers and fallers for the preseason. Can you give a peek behind the curtain and talk about some of your biggest risers and fallers?
Yeah, I'll give 1 or 2 at every position here. So at quarterback, Sam Darnell to me has just looked like a quarterback ready to take, a pretty big leap in his second season. He's looked really comfortable. He's been accurate. And it's especially impressive considering he's in a brand new offense here under Adam Gase and, has a few new pass catchers he's working with. Jamison Crowder in particular. Ty Montgomery has been pretty involved too. So I think Darnold is a guy who's been a riser for me at quarterback.
My Scott Fishbowl team loves hearing that.
So what do you think about Lev Bell in that same situation?
He's a guy I've been shying away from in the first round just because there's too many question marks with him. And, the biggest one is obviously he just hasn't played football in, a year now. But I will say the fact that the Jets offense has looked this good in the preseason has made me come up a bit on Le'Veon Bell. So I would consider him if he sneaks into the second round, but there's just guys I like better in the first.
So if, let's say he's going 1-8, 1-9, who are you taking there besides him?
So I'll mention James Conner because he's actually the next guy on my list here as a preseason riser. There was talk throughout the spring of the Steelers being more of a committee backfield with Jalen Samuels stealing quite a bit from James Conner, but everything we've seen in the preseason is that Conner is going to play, something close to the role he was in last season as, an every down feature back. And remember, he was a top 6 fantasy running back before he had that injury at the end of the season. And I think Conner has looked excellent this preseason. I mean, let's remember Conner had cancer. So I think it's not surprising that this guy might still be getting better. So for me, Conner's right there with David Johnson as my RB5, RB6.
Are you one of the guys that it's risk averse in the top round? So no Gurley, no Zeke, no Bell.
Yeah. So again, I'm avoiding Bell in the first round. Zeke, I'm still taking him at 4. He was my number 1 running back, my number 1 overall player before the holdout started, and I still feel pretty confident he's going to be there for week 1. So I'll take Zeke at 4. Gurley for me is someone I'll consider in the second round. Too much risk in the first round for me.
So who do you think is the backup for Gurley? If let's say you did spend that second round pick on Todd Gurley, and you're looking probably around the 6th or 7th round, you're going to have to nab the handcuff for him just because of who it is, and you're going to have to reach to get him. Which one of the 2 running backs are you looking to nab?
Well, I'm not taking Darrell Henderson at his cost. I don't think he's going to have a big enough role behind Todd Gurley whenever Gurley's healthy to really be a guy we can bank on in fantasy lineups. And then if Gurley misses time this season, I think Malcolm Brown is the guy we're going to want in fantasy lineups. I think it's telling that Brown hasn't played this preseason. I think that tells me the Rams know what they have in this guy. They want to protect him. And then Darrell Henderson, he's struggled. He's struggling. He said he's struggling to fit in that system. It's a lot different than the system he ran at Memphis. So I still like Henderson as a talent, but he's just going too high in drafts for me.
And I think so. There was news recently that they expect Gurley to get 75-80% of what he got last year. So I wouldn't be surprised if Darrell Henderson got that other 20 to 25%. But if something were to happen to Gurley, literally Malcolm Brown would just slot into the 75 to 80%, and Darrell Henderson would still take that 20 to 25%.
Could be, yeah. Yeah, I would maybe say 65-35 in favor of Brown, or maybe even 60-40, something like that. But I do think Brown would be the better fantasy bet.
All right. So I see you've got Leonard Fournette on your list. I know a lot of people are holding off on him. They're worried about his injuries, but it looks like you're good to go.
Yeah, I mean, I get it with Fournette. He's burned me too, so I'm a bit gun shy. But he's also going in the third round this year. I mean, he was a first or early second rounder last year, so we're getting a round or a round and a half discount this year. When Fournette is healthy this season, he's going to be one of the best volume bets at the position. That third preseason game, the first and only game that Nick Foles is going to play this preseason, Fournette was in on 17 of Nick Foles' 18 snaps. He got 7 carries, was targeted on 3 of Foles' 10 pass attempts. So, we've heard the Jags want to use Fournette more in the passing game this season. We saw that in the preseason game. So again, when Fournette's healthy, he's going to be ranked as a top 10 running back in the weekly rankings.
Yeah, and I can't stand what you see people post all the time, talk about who are you completely avoiding this year? Who will you not take? And my answer is always, I will take everybody at a discount. There's not a player I won't take. And Leonard Fournette has his discount built in this year. He's a first-round talent going in the third round because of his injury. So, like, it's hard to avoid players, especially when you're getting a 2-round discount because of injury.
Yep, exactly.
So speaking of injuries, like the immaculate recovery of Emmanuel Sanders, like, I mean,
that's the quickest Achilles injury heal in the history of Achilles injuries.
It's got to be the only one, right? And he's done it in less than a year.
Yeah, it was last December. So what's that? Like, he's not even 9 months removed at this point. Yeah, and Sanders was a guy I was avoiding in drafts all spring because I thought he was going to open the season on the PUP list, missed the first 6 games, but we started to hear in training camp that he was looking good, and then we saw it with our own eyes in that second preseason game. He caught a ball on Denver's first offensive snap, had the 19-yarder on the end around, also had a 45-yard catch deep downfield in that game. You're not going to see it in the box score because it was negated by a penalty, but he got downfield, beat his guy deep, made the catch. So he looks like Emmanuel Sanders, and Sanders was sitting 15th among wide receivers in PPR points when he went down last season. So, I'm not sure I'd bet on him finishing that high this year, but I think he's a value where he's going in drafts right now.
So where do you have him finishing? Or around off the top of your head?
Yeah, I have him in the upper 30s. I think he's like 31 or 32 in my wide receiver rankings.
So wide receiver 3, and that's fair. There's definitely risk. He could re-aggravate the Achilles, but I agree with the whole, you thought he was going to be on the PUP. Man, you are not alone.
Like his doctors and...
he thought he was going to be on the PUP, and I mean, it's just crazy. I think he needs to be tested. He may be taking some of Gronk's CBD oil.
So I'm looking now. So your tight end warms my heart. I'm a Buccaneers fan.
I was going to let you go with this one, Jason. This one's all you, buddy.
I'm a Buccaneers fan. I want to see O.J. Howard do it this year. Everything is great with O.J. Howard if he's on the field.
Well, and as long as he's healthy, he's going to be on the field, it looks like, for basically every snap this season. So in the preseason, Jameis Winston played 58 snaps. O.J. Howard was on the field for 55 of them, so that's a 95% snap rate. He's never even reached an 80% snap rate in any single game of his career. 24 career games, he's never hit 80%. So I think he's going to set a career high in playing time this season. He should set a career high in targets pretty easily with Deshaun Jackson and Adam Humphries gone. So yeah, I think Howard could work his way into that George Kittle, Zach Ertz tier of tight ends by the end of the season.
So is it crazy to have O.J. Howard ranked above Kittle? Because like in my personal rankings, I actually have him above Kittle.
No, it's not crazy. I have Kittle ranked higher, but I'd rather take O.J. Howard in the 5th round than spend a 2nd or 3rd rounder on George Kittle.
Yeah, I was going to say the thing that I don't like to do when I do my drafts is I'll look at the year before, and if it's somebody coming off a record-breaking season like Kittle and Ertz, like I'm automatically selling at their ADP because it's going to be inflated, and they're just not going to be able to repeat the same numbers they gave you the year before.
Yeah, Kittle's in for some regression in the yards per catch department. I doubt he matches the amount of targets he saw last year. He could come up in the touchdown department. He only scored 5 times last year, so you could see him scoring 7 or 8 times. But yeah, I think betting on him scoring fewer fantasy points this year than last is a pretty safe bet.
Yeah, I mean, where he's going, he basically has to repeat in order to pay off.
Yeah, there's no value built in there. My next one, I love him. Carryon Johnson. I loved him last year. I love him again this year. And then I threw myself a little private party when they traded Theo Riddick. You want to talk about Carryon for a little bit?
Yeah, so I have him as a loser in my article. Unfortunately, hey, listen, I still love him too. His usage this preseason was a bit strange. In that he was held out of the preseason opener. In that second preseason game, he was pulled on all 3 third downs with the first team offense, twice for C.J. Anderson, once for Ty Johnson. And then in that third preseason game, Carryon had the first series to himself, but then C.J. Anderson played the entire second possession. Then Carryon Johnson re-entered for the third before giving way to C.J. Anderson and Ty Johnson again. So I was hoping we were going to get, feature back usage from Carryon Johnson, especially after Theo Riddick was released. But I do think that C.J. Anderson and maybe Ty Johnson are going to be a bit more involved than we would like. That said, I do still like Carryon Johnson as a third-round target in fantasy drafts.
Well, and I think the biggest issue and the reason why he's one of the biggest losers is just because his ADP exploded.
Right.
They started talking him up as a pass catcher. He's going to catch a ton of balls out of the backfield. We're going to use him regularly. And, I've seen people take him as high as the second round. And so, if you set that as your expectation, he becomes a loser when you feel like he should be a third round guy.
Exactly. The second round is a bit too rich for me for Carryon Johnson, but hopefully that kind of comes back down into the third, because I do like him as a third rounder.
I think I was gonna say I think that Detroit's just gonna run the ball so much,
yes,
that even with C.J. Anderson getting touches and even with Ty Johnson getting a couple of passes here and there, I still believe Carryon's volume is going to be crazy.
I mean, you don't think the great Zach Zenner getting dropped helps him out at all?
That's the real reason I threw myself a little party. They cut Zach Zenner.
So the last name on here, and I'm assuming since he's under Carryon Johnson, he's also a loser, is Mark Andrews.
Yeah, worrisome preseason for Andrews. He was only on the field for 31% of Baltimore's first team snaps, and he wasn't targeted on any of Lamar Jackson's 16 pass attempts. It's basically a 3-man tight end committee in Baltimore with Andrews, Hayden Hurst, and Nick Boyle, who is more of a blocking tight end, but he's still going to play his fair share of snaps. So Andrews, I like the player, but he's in a 3-man tight end committee on a run heavy offense. So for me, it's tough to see him being a guy we can count on in fantasy lineups week in and week out.
Do you like any of the pass catchers on that team?
Not really. I mean, Miles Boykin super late, and maybe Marquise Brown super late. But I don't see, they're more best ball picks where, you hope you get 2 or 3 big weeks out of them. But I think, even those guys, if they're starting, they're going to have a lot of weeks where they only see 2 or 3 targets.
Yeah, I don't see a whole lot of consistency from any of the receivers on that team at all. I don't avoid teams, but for fantasy purposes, that's one team I am completely avoiding as far as catchers go. I'll take Justice Hill.
Yes.
I'll definitely take Mark Ingram, but as far as the pass catchers, I've faded everybody on the Ravens.
Yep, I'm with you. You want to invest in that running game, but mostly avoid the passing game.
So are you going to draft the quarterback since you're investing in the running game?
I have Lamar Jackson ranked a bit lower than he tends to go, and I have no issue with where he's going. I mean, he definitely has the upside if he takes a step forward as a passer. There are so many fantasy viable quarterbacks out there that I tend to just be waiting, and when Dak Prescott's been a big target of mine, if I can get him in the 12th round or whatever it is, that tends to be where I've been going.
I just drafted Dak Prescott in the 12th round in our home league on Sunday night. So another thing I like to hear.
So what are some of your biggest takeaways from the preseason? I see you have a couple people on here that are ranked higher than you thought you would at the start of the rankings.
Yeah, I think 2 of my biggest risers, probably the biggest, Matt Breida. Drake McKinnon did return to practice here on Tuesday, but I'm not banking on him having an early season role. And to me, Breida's looked like the 49ers' best running back this preseason, and he was great last year, despite playing through what was a high ankle sprain for most of the season. He's healthy now. He's looking good. He saw about 40% of the first team snaps. It was about a 60-40 split in favor of Tevin Coleman, but I wouldn't be surprised if that sort of moves closer to a 50-50 split if Breida continues to play like he has been playing. So I think Breida is a nice target, as like your RB4.
Yeah, I had him last year. The biggest issue with Breida is he would start your game and not finish your game.
Right.
And then he'd come in and he'd do great for a couple. All of a sudden you had a bunch of points. Hey, look, I got 5 points right away from Matt Breida. And then the next thing you know is you get that sleeper notification. Matt Breida's out with an arm injury. It looks serious. And then half a dozen plays later, he comes back in, but he doesn't run well anymore. Yeah. So the other guy on here, and he's a guy that I have almost everywhere. I've loved him. I couldn't get rid of him last offseason to the penny owner, and now the penny owner's been coming to me, offering me penny. So Chris Carson is up after your preseason.
Yeah, and I was sort of the belief that Penny was going to turn this into something close to a 50-50 committee in the spring. But everything we've heard and especially seen in the preseason, Carson has been pretty much dominating the first team snaps in the preseason, and he's just looked like a better runner than Rashad Penny. And then we've heard all the stuff from Seattle's coaching staff and the Seattle beat writers that Carson's going to play a bigger role in the passing game this season, which obviously helps both his weekly ceiling and floor. So Carson's a guy, his ADP's on the rise. Even in the late third round and anywhere in the fourth round, I think Chris Carson is a nice pick.
Yeah, I was just going to ask how high you would go on Chris Carson.
Yeah, I think late third round, once guys like Carryon Johnson, Leonard Fournette are off the board, Carson's sort of the next running back up for me.
So do you really think that Seattle's going to run the ball about 30 times? And if so, at his ADP, does that still make Penny a value?
Yeah, I do think Seattle, I buy they want to run the ball as much as possible. That said, they have some tough games early on where they might find themselves trailing. I think the defense isn't going to be great. So, game script might kind of force them to throw more than they want to. I think you're going to see Penny mix in for, say 8 to 10 carries per game, which, maybe when bye weeks start to hit, makes him an option. And he's definitely a high-end handcuff. I mean, Chris Carson's had some trouble staying healthy, and if he goes down, then, Penny becomes, probably a borderline running back one just because of the volume. So Penny definitely still has a place on fantasy rosters. I just think, Carson's the clear lead guy here.
So what you're saying is after the first couple of tough games, you might be able to buy Carson up pretty cheap.
Essentially, I mean, they open at home for the Bengals. That's not a tough game. That's a smash spot for Chris Carson. He'll be in my DFS lineups week 1.
So speaking of schedule, how much does schedule play in week to week as far as rankings? For let's say wide receivers, do you look up DB matchups, or is that kind of a little overblown?
I look at wide receiver cornerback matchups for sure, but again, targets are the most important thing. So if I think a guy's a good bet for 8 to 10 targets, even in a tough matchup, he's going to be pretty high in my rankings and in my fantasy lineups.
Is there anybody else besides Chris Carson and Matt Breida that you find yourself just drafting late in a lot of drafts? Like we do a lot of sleepers here. So can you give us a sleeper at each position?
Yeah, we've actually already talked about 2 of the guys I had here. Sam Darnold has sort of become my favorite late quarterback target. He does open with I know he opens versus the Bills, so you're probably not going to want to use him in that matchup, but he does have some easier matchups into later September and October. So I like Sam Darnold. My running back sleeper is Malcolm Brown. I think with your last pick, take Malcolm Brown. Just see what happens in this backfield if Todd Gurley is right. How much they're going to scale back his work. So Malcolm Brown's my running back sleeper. The guy I've been touting basically all offseason here, Tyrell Williams, I think continues to be way, way undervalued. The Raiders gave this guy a big contract in free agency. I think Williams is like the 17th highest paid wide receiver right now in terms of average annual salary. I think he's obviously the clear number 2 wide receiver in Oakland behind Antonio Brown. And without anything proven at tight end, we'll see about Darren Waller. I think Tyrell Williams has a pretty clear path to 100+ targets. And I also think he's just a good player. I mean, he's been super efficient with the Chargers. He had that one year where he did get over 100 targets and finished as a top 20 wide receiver. So we've seen him do it when he gets the volume. I think he's going to get the volume this season. I think Williams is going to produce as a wide receiver 3, and he's going at like a wide receiver 5 price tag.
The fact that Brown's on the other side, I mean, you can't 100% take what happened with the Steelers and move it over to the Raiders for like a ton of different reasons, but one of the things, receivers that played opposite of Antonio Brown seem to do pretty okay for themselves because he just draws so much attention.
Yep, great point.
Yeah, I've been a huge Tyrell Williams fan going back to last year with the Chargers. If I had to pick between one of the Williams, either Mike or Tyrell last year, I was on the Tyrell bandwagon, and with him going to Oakland, absolutely love it. I thought it was a great landing spot for him. Like you said, clear shot at the number 2 wide receiver there. But I think he's actually going to surprise a lot of people there this year. I think he'll probably get you close to 900 yards and about 6 touchdowns this year.
Well, so let me ask you this too. So what do you think, we're talking up Tyrell Williams, what do you think about Derek Carr this year?
I've drafted him quite a bit, actually. I mean, I think he's a better player. I'm not saying he's great, but I think he's a better player than general consensus right now. And now he has, the best wide receiver duo he's had as a pro. Added Josh Jacobs, who can do some stuff out of the backfield. So I think, in best ball leagues, I've been taking Carr quite a bit as my quarterback too. And I think even in lineup setting leagues, he's a guy who can be a spot starter at times this season.
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, he was an MVP candidate. He came back from injury, and usually when you hurt yourself, it takes a year to get back in. For a lot of these quarterbacks, it takes a whole year of play before you trust being on the field again. He came back to a mess with John Gruden and trading away talent, right? And, so now all of a sudden he can't play football in the NFL. That seems to be a consensus going around. I don't know. I'm not going to say he's going to light the world on fire and be an MVP candidate this year, but man, he could be top 12.
Yeah, like you mentioned, it's his second year with Gruden, so that should help. And that defense is still really bad, which I think is good news for our fantasy quarterbacks. We like when they're in shootouts, playing from behind, having to throw the football.
And that's what we call the Jameis Winston effect.
Yep.
So your tight end here, one of the guys that is a sleeper is Gerald Everett. So you're the only person I've ever heard say that. So I'd love to hear. And listen, he's on a great team with a great offense. So why not, right? So why don't you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, that's part of it. Just he's a cheap piece of the Rams passing game. So I think that alone is a mark in his favor. And the guy was a 2nd round pick. He's a talented pass catching tight end. We saw his playing time and his target share climb over the second half of last season. And if Todd Gurley is going to be less than what he was last year, we'll see about Cooper Kupp returning from his torn ACL. But I just think there's a chance Everett plays a bigger role in this passing game, and really a tight end. I mean, once you get past the first 12 to 14 guys, it's really a crapshoot. You're just looking for someone with a shot at a touchdown or two. And I think, again, Everett, just being in that Rams offense is going to be a decent bet for touchdowns every week.
So speaking of the Rams offense, rank the 3 wide receivers for me. Who do you got?
Yeah, I have Woods just above Brandon Cooks, and it's really because Woods last year was just super reliable from week to week. I think he finished as a top 36 wide receiver in 15 of his 16 games. I do think Brandon Cooks obviously brings more of the big playability, more of the weekly upside. So I have Cooks just behind Robert Woods, and then I have Cooper Kupp, 5 or 6 spots below those two in the wide receiver rankings, just because there is some risk on him coming off that torn ACL.
Yeah, so if you need floor, Robert Woods. If you need ceiling, Brandon Cooks, and then Cooper Kupp's a great throw-in as well.
Correct.
So when you're doing your draft, do you aim for high upside guys? Like, what round do you start looking at the higher upside versus safer floors?
Yeah, so just thinking about drafts this year, once you get into the 6th round, to me, there's no sure things in any spot. At that point, it's sort of go get your guys, get the guys you like and aim for that upside. So, maybe the first 5 picks, try to lay a, relatively safe floor, and then just sort of, attack the guys you think can be league winners from round 6 on.
Does draft position play a part in the way you draft?
Oh, for sure. I mean, to me, if I have a top 4 pick, I'm taking one of those top 4 running backs. If I have a pick at the end of the first round, like say 9 through 12, I've liked my teams when I start wide receiver, or at least one wide receiver, and then maybe come back with someone like James Conner if he's still there in the second. So yeah, draft positioning definitely impacts how I'm going to attack the draft.
So if you're in the back half, which 2 wide receivers which do you want?
Julio Jones is my top-ranked wide receiver, so he's the guy I've been getting quite a bit. I mean, I won't argue with the fact that DeAndre Hopkins and Devontae Adams are safer, but if Julio plays 16 games this year, I like him to lead wide receivers in fantasy points. And I actually have Odell Beckham as my number 2 wide receiver, and sort of same story there. There's some injury risk with Beckham, but I think his upside is massive playing with a quarterback as good as Baker Mayfield.
So where do you have Baker ranked this year?
Baker is my quarterback 6 right now.
Who do you have ahead of him?
I have, the other quarterback I really like is Carson Wentz. He is my number 3 quarterback right now, so I've been taking him quite a bit in the 7th, 8th, 9th round.
It's nice when you get your number 3 guy back in the 9th.
Well, if people were smart, they would be getting like the number 1 or the number 2 guy in the 7th or 8th round, and not spending those early picks on quarterbacks.
Right.
Do you have Mahomes regressing? I mean, 50 is probably he's ripe for regression. So if he gets 45, it's regression, but it's not really regression. You know what I mean? But do you have him slated for a big drop off, a small drop off? What do you got?
Yeah, my projections have Mahomes at 35 passing touchdowns. But he's still pretty clearly my top ranked quarterback. That said, I do think Deshaun Watson could challenge him for that spot this season.
Man, how bad will it hurt though if you lose 15 touchdowns, but you take the guy in the 2nd or 3rd round?
Yeah, I mean 2nd or 3rd round is way too early. I've actually drafted Mahomes. I got him in the 5th round in one of my drafts earlier this summer, and I think that's when he starts to make sense. But 2nd or 3rd round's too early.
See, that's the kind of stuff. I was in a draft and I'm looking at Aaron Rodgers in the 8th and I'm going, okay, I don't take quarterbacks this early, but Aaron Rodgers might be there, and I have to take him in the 8th.
Yeah, waiting on quarterback has become like the cool thing to do now. So you'll get into some drafts where the quarterbacks start dropping too far. Like again, Patrick Mahomes in the 5th makes sense. I think Deshaun Watson in the 7th round makes sense, and then Rodgers, Wentz, those guys in the 8th or 9th I think are good values.
I was going to say, and that's exactly what it's all about is finding those late values. If everybody preaches take the quarterback late, but like Jason said, and like you said with Mahomes, if Mahomes is falling to the 5th round, okay, you can grab a quarterback in the 5th round, and get that value with him. Same thing with Aaron Rodgers in the 8th. That's crazy value at that point. Wait for your quarterbacks, but at some point, if they're just continuing to fall, take one at the value if you can get it.
Do you have a favorite mid-round wide receiver? There's a bunch of mid-round wide receivers this year. Marvin Jones is one, but Alshon Jeffries is in there. What do you have a favorite? And is there a guy in there, especially the 2 I just mentioned, that you don't like?
So I'm definitely on the Chris Godwin train. I know a lot of people are, and he's going in the 4th round now, but I think he's a value even in the 4th round. So like Chris Godwin, I do like Alshon Jeffrey. I've picked him, in the 7th round if he gets there. I think he's still the number 1 wide receiver in this passing game that I obviously like because I love Carson Wentz so much. So I think Jeffrey's a value. Allen Robinson, I think the Bears offense could take a step forward even from, last year they were pretty solid. I think they could be better this year in their 2nd season under Matt Nagy. Allen Robinson's still the clear number 1 guy there, another year removed from that torn ACL. So I think Robinson could be a good value at his ADP, which is in the 7th round right now.
And it's funny because we didn't hear much about Robinson all preseason, and now it's draft season, and there's a lot of people now jumping in on Allen Robinson, and I was getting so much of him early, and now it seems like everybody's finally catching on that he's a really good value.
Yeah. Sammy Watkins too is another guy I like, and he's like the Leonard Fournette at wide receiver, where he's probably going to miss time. But, in the games he was healthy last season, he produced as a top 24 wide receiver. And in that Chiefs offense, he's still the clear number 2 guy there. I think when he's healthy, he's going to crush the price tag he's going at right now.
Do you have anybody in your top 10 at running back and wide receiver that if they were to just completely bust outside of injury, that just looking back, you'd be like, yep, honestly, you know what? That probably doesn't surprise me.
At running back, it's Le'Veon Bell, again, just because I think we don't know what all that time off is going to mean for Le'Veon Bell. At wide receiver, I'd probably go with Mike Evans, because I think there's a chance that Chris Godwin out-targets Mike Evans this season. And if that happens, Evans isn't going to pay off his price tag.
And is there the opposite of that? Is there anybody that you have outside of the top 10 that if they finish inside the top 10 at the end of the year, you're like, yep, that probably doesn't surprise me either?
So Chris Godwin, I I think Tyler Lockett has a chance. I mean, he was a borderline top 10 wide receiver last year, and the efficiency was obviously unsustainable last year. But he's also going to see a pretty big spike in targets. I think he's an awesome player. He's playing with one of the game's most efficient quarterbacks. So Tyler Lockett, I'd say, has that upside. Hey, running back, it's really a lot of the guys we've already talked about. Carryon Johnson, Leonard Fournette, if he stays healthy. I'll throw in Aaron Jones, too. He's another guy I've liked targeting in the third round. I think he's a big, big talent. Needs to stay healthy. Needs the new Packers coaching staff to commit to him as the lead guy, but I think they're gonna. So I would not be surprised at all if Aaron Jones finishes as a top 10 running back.
Not worried about a timeshare there with Jamal Williams?
Not really. Aaron Jones is such a better running back than Jamal Williams, and I think I trust Matt LaFleur to figure that out and make Jones his guy.
Everybody with eyes can see that Aaron Jones is better, but I just worry because Matt LaFleur came from Tennessee, where they didn't decide until really late to make Derrick Henry the guy. So I worry about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's fair. Everything I've heard out of Green Bay, though, this training camp has been Jones running as the clear number one guy when he's not been sidelined with that hamstring injury. And again, to me, durability is the biggest concern with Aaron Jones.
He's also been talked up this offseason by Rodgers, and
yep.
If Rodgers is giving you his endorsement, then yeah, you should be good to go.
Let me throw out one more guy who I think could be top 10 in PPR leagues, Duke Johnson. I think the table is set for him here. I've always thought that he could be a guy who sees 13, 14, 15 carries per game at the NFL level, and he's obviously one of the better pass-catching backs. So if the Texans commit to him as a 15 to 18 touch per game guy, I think he could finish top 10.
You think he can carry a full workload there, 200 plus touches?
Yeah, he did it in college. He had 240 plus carries in his final season at Miami. Duke Johnson's 210 pounds. He's not that small. I think people think he's like a 190 pounder just because how he was used in Cleveland, but he has the size, I think, to again, carry 15 or so times per game.
No, I absolutely love Duke Johnson. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up for the evening.
We know you've got a draft coming. We want to get you out in time to prep.
Yep. I'm doing the Going Deep draft, actually. It's with Mike Clay of ESPN. It's a super fun league because it's a super flex, and then you start 3 running backs, 6 wide receivers, and 2 tight ends.
That is deep.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I like it.
So good luck with that. I do some crazy leagues myself, but nothing like that.
Yeah, it's fun.
Well, that'll be it for tonight's show. Again, Jared, we'd like to thank you for joining us. If you could, please tell the listeners where they can follow you, where they can consume your content.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at SmolaDS. It's SMOLADS. And then check us out at DraftSharks.com. We have a podcast that you should give a listen to before your drafts and become a DS Insider for updated rankings 24/7 and customized cheat sheets. We can customize those rankings to your exact league rules.
Yeah, so if you listened earlier, Jared said they answer questions right away when you reach out to him if you're an insider. It almost sounds like he'll give you a cell number. You can text him and become BFFs.
The closest thing to that, yep.
So we want to thank everybody for listening. Don't forget, you can find us on sleeperwire.com. You can listen to all of our podcasts, including Dynasty Wire, Break from the Grind, Fantasy Football Champs. You can send us questions through the Sleeperwire site. And Jared, good luck with your draft this evening.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. That was fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.